long-standing partnership. For over 30 years, they've been collaborating in roadmaps and using each other's products. Microsoft has used a lot of SAP products, in fact, a large number of environments, and SAP also has used a large number of Microsoft products, including deployments in the Azure cloud. And we can see from this chart that Azure is the leading provider where SAP deployment has been taking place. Also, with this joint roadmap, we are able to bring products and services and collaborate even closer with our customers. When we look at the migration to the cloud, the acceleration of the savings and, of course, the optimization, we look at the type of virtual machines that we have deployed. As we mentioned, the M-type machines, which are memory optimized, provide you the capability of deploying systems with 12 terabytes up to 20 terabytes or a scale out of 120 terabytes. And these deployments, based on the large number of regions, over 70 regions globally, I can then choose the location where I want to deploy, and within those regions, we have availability zones. So I have the security and the capability of deploying redundant systems across these zones. And I can also leverage the migration tools that we continue to use. You can use DMO, you can also use Software Provisioning Manager for your deployment. And account with a number of collectors. We are looking at over 900 connectors, these from Sentinel or Data Factory, or if you look at the deployment on the business suites, also the type of connectors that I'll find in the Power Platform, which low-code or no-code kind of deployment really allows for integration of multiple services. When we look at the security of the environment, this is one of the critical elements. Security and threat monitoring really allows for filtration of those critical signals that are really malicious to your environment. So if I look at the high availability of services like Microsoft Entra for identity, which provide authentication and authorization, and also Sentinel with the connector specifically for SAP, and of course, Microsoft Defender for Cloud, the zero trust approach from Microsoft, and a large investment to ensure that the customer environment is secure. With that, we also look at the backups. We provide HANA backup. We are going to be seeing this service later on today with the business continuity and disaster recovery across the availability zones in multiple regions. Now is a time where you can deploy redundant services in the same region across availability zones or across the region for asynchronous disaster recovery. When we talk about intelligent insights, we can gain immediate intelligent insights from real-time decision-making data. So we can create intelligent workflows, seamless workflows using Azure Data Factory to be able to leverage the data from our systems into data warehouses and analytical tools. Success access to these data is also provide content for predictive analysis, for example, using machine learning and Azure OpenAI, where we can begin to talk to our own data. We can also visualize the insight into Power BI and, of course, the integration with Fiori and other services. Now, enhanced productivity. In this case, we talked about the Office 365 copilots. This leverage large language module and machine learning, particularly Azure OpenAI, where we are able to take advantage of all the capability of the Office platforms, be more productive, be more creative, be more collaborative, and of course, talk to our own data. With this, the conversational chatbots allows you to have a copilot that allows you to look at the data and have deep integration between the services, both from SAP and from Microsoft position. So in summary, when we look at the deployment or when we look at the migration of your services to the Microsoft Cloud, we are going to begin to leverage a large ecosystem of services that are readily available to complete this migration. First, we can look at the security aspects that we are going to find in Microsoft services like Microsoft Entra for ID and SSO for single sign-on. Also Sentinel, we're going to see this from threat monitoring. When we look at the apps from the Office perspective, Microsoft Copilots and 365, Microsoft Word and Excel and PowerPoint, for example. Also the business applications. This could be Logic Apps, Dynamics 365. From analytics apps, now we're looking at Power BI, analytics services, also the Azure AI services, such as vision, text analysis, sentiment analysis that can quickly integrate with your data. In systems, data factory, for example, for your data in movement, when I look at the pipelines, and also the data catalogs and partner solutions. Large number of partners to help you deploy and realize the value of this migration. With that, we also look at a data such as SQL database or Synapse Analytics for your data warehouse, and also the data lakes. If we look at the data lakes and the SQL deployment, and of course, HDD Insights and Cosmos DB. That's a direct access once you begin your migration process. And lastly, we can look at streaming data, such as streaming insights, and of course, event hubs, IoT hubs. So if we have intelligent resources and we are monitoring those resources, we can now realize the value right into the ecosystem. From Office 365 Copilot, we begin to embed these so you can begin to look at your own data. This is a time where you can be a lot more creative with Microsoft Word. We can be more analytical with Excel. We can also be a lot more expressive with PowerPoint, more productive with Outlook, and of course, don't forget collaboration with Teams. We can deploy the copilots in two reasons. One, we can embed these with the copilots for each one of these tools, and we can also have a chatbot for a conversation with your own data. Now you can have the business conversation that can help you realize the value in having a direct, productive discussion with your data. So now let's take a quick look at a demo of the Copilot 365. In this example, Tara, the hiring manager, is looking for a sustainability supply chain consultant, given the growing focus on sustainability within her organization. Tara needs to create a job description to start recruiting candidates as quickly as possible. Tara sees that there is a job description for her review. By clicking on the item, she is brought directly into SuccessFactors. This is a generic job description, and she chooses to enhance it with AI. The AI is pulling data from SuccessFactors to propose a more updated job description that more accurately captures the skills and attributes she is looking for. To collaborate with a recruiter, she opens the job description with Microsoft Word to further refine it. Microsoft Copilot 365 is going to help her do that. Tara asks for additional certifications to make the job description more tailored based on similar roles. There are a few recommendations that will help her complete the job description. Tara ensures that there is no biased language in the job description. Copilot scans the job description and suggests replacing the word chairman with something more inclusive. Now that the job description is done, Tara can ask Copilot to upload it directly into SuccessFactors to start recruiting. Next, let's look at learning. Dinesh is an employee that had applied for the job that Tara is hiring for. He decided to take some learning courses to sharpen his skills in sustainability sourcing. Within Microsoft Viva Learning, he asks the Copilot for ideas, and a personalized learning recommendation comes up. He asks Copilot for a few more recommendations, and a curated learning collection is created. As Dinesh makes progress on each course, his skills are automatically updated in SAP SuccessFactors growth portfolio. As we can see, Dinesh gained a new skills in sustainability sourcing, and he can measure his proficiency as he continues his learning over time. Now let's take a look at one more scenario. Here, an interview has been arranged for Tara to speak with Dinesh. Tara receives an automated message in Teams from SuccessFactors bot reminding her of the upcoming interview. Using the AI, the bot provides interview questions based on the job description and the candidate's cover letter and resume, and ensures inclusive language. When the interview is over, SuccessFactors bot prompts Tara to complete the interview assessment. Tara fills out the form, and the data is uploaded back into SuccessFactors, all without leaving the Teams application. In this session, we are going to look at the migration options. We start the migration discussion by looking at the deployment in multiple ways. First, from a migration and deployment, all the way to management and optimize your environment. If you are already using let's say, not apps today, your skills and your teams are prepared to use that, you can continue to leverage that with your migration from a file perspective. NFS4 support up to 400,000 IOPS. It's a great option. Now, there are times when we look at the deployment from the SAP perspective. SAP controls and, of course, maintains the certification of all the systems. And with that, you can identify virtual machines and machine types to run your SAP HANA, your NetWeaver, or your other components. And within that, you can also look at the migration options, the same tools that you use for migration with DMO or Software Provisioning Manager. You can continue to leverage those tools. Now, when you deploy your environment using virtual machines, it is a manual approach. You need to select the virtual networks, you need to select your machine sizes, your disks, your files, and then you make your deployment. And deploying an entire environment, it could take hours or even days, depending on the size of your environment. To make this easier, we have created the Azure Center for SAP Solution. The Azure Center for SAP Solution will help automate this task. Instead of deploying a single virtual machine, I can simply specify an entire SID, maybe a multi-tier with my web application, my applications, and my databases, all deployed at once and manageable and configured. It will cut down that deployment from days to maybe hours, as opposed to be able to deploy this automatically. You can also choose to do this manually. Now, we have the deployment automation framework. The deployment automation framework is designed for customers and partners that want to be able to deploy systems following the best practices, let's say the blueprints for your deployment. This could be across multiple regions or across multiple environment types. Now, the automation framework is a free service and customers can start using right away. You're going to pay only for the services that are deployed within that. The same could be said for the Azure Center for SAP Solution. You are going to have this as a service, and you're going to be paying for the virtual machines, the storage, and the systems that come with it. We are going to be discussing this in the next sessions. From a deployment perspective, we also look at the monitoring. We leverage Azure Monitor, the traditional with the telemetry data and the event data, but we also look at the Azure Monitor for SAP Solution that really provides detailed management for the SAP HANA, NetWeaver, also your clusters, your SQL database, or your Linux systems. We'll be able to have a demonstration on this in the coming sessions. Also, from a backup, when you look at the sustainability, I want to be able to do disaster recovery. Azure Backup is a critical component. It really helps to secure. It is a cost-effective way to be able to maintain your HANA environment and the rest of your systems updated. And from a cost management perspective, we can have an at-a-glance view of overall cost and billing within the Microsoft environment. Lastly, we look at the security from Microsoft Sentinel and also from Defender for Cloud. This allows us to be able to provide protection, response, and application and infrastructure layers. Now, the choices from your product deployment, there are three basic choices for your deployment. First, we can look at it from an IaaS, or infrastructure as a service. This is the one that I'm going to be able to choose my machine. I have a lot more control over the machine types, the disks, the files, the load balancers, the components that I want to deploy. I can also choose virtual machines that fit my need. These could be, for example, for your NetWeaver deployment with general purpose machines. But I also may choose memory optimized machines like the E machines and the M machines. And in particular, the M machines, which are, we call, purposely built for SAP. These are the machines that I mentioned that can go up to, we talked about 700,000 or 750,000 SAPs. That could translate into about 1.4 billion transactions per hour. Now, if we look at from IaaS deployment, this gives you a lot of control over your deployment. You choose and you maintain the systems. But there's also the Cloud Appliance Library. The Cloud Appliance Library, it is a purposely built design. So in this case, it's a solution that you can deploy directly in Azure. You can choose the type of system that you want to deploy, and it's already configured, and you can choose the deployment location. You don't have as much control as you do for the IaaS deployment. And lastly, we have the SAP Rise. Now, SAP Rise is a comprehensive subscription-based service provided by SAP. It is deployed in an SAP subscription in an SAP tenant. SAP controls that environment. Customers will be able to have access to this content, but it is a service provided, supported, and maintained by SAP. Later, we're going to see how to configure, how to connect your existing environment to the SAP Rise environment. Now, the certification of these machines are critical. The VMs, we mentioned about the M-type machines with the purposely built systems that can go very large, 12 terabytes, scale up 20 terabytes, and scale out up to 120 terabytes. And also leverage disks, for example, like the Ultra disks that are up to 65 terabits and provides 4 gigabits of data throughput. With that, let's take a quick look at a machine selector. This is an option that allows us to choose. We don't need to be right, and I'll be the first one to tell you, we don't need to be right day one when it comes to select the machine. So we have created a tool that will help you make a determination what machine may be best suited for your deployment. Again, this does not include SAPs or the size of the system. It's a general overview based on the type of workload that you want to deploy or the type of machine that you want to choose. For this demo, here in the virtual machine selector, let's choose a virtual machine based on workload types. We could also choose based on OS and software or based on deployment regions. When we click Next, I can then see we have about 664 virtual machines to choose from. We are going to select a memory optimized. For HANA deployment, we know that these are the type of machines we are going to select. And we have about 301 options for that. Next, let's select the number of CPU and amount of memory. I want a virtual machine with at least 300 virtual cores and about 1 terabyte of RAM. Very well. That brings me to 3 virtual machines that I can select. Next, let's look at the disks. I have premium disks, standard, and of course, I have ephemeral disks. For HANA deployment, we are going to choose premium SSD disks. So I'm going to deselect the other disks. And here's a definition of each disk. Let's click Next. Now, in terms of the disks, here we are going to find a quick definition and description of each of the disk size. Once again, we are not going to be deploying standard disks. So let's go ahead and deselect those and select only premium disks SSD, premium 2 with 2.5 gigabits, and of course, ultra disks with 4 gigabits per second. Now, the number of disks, what I want to select. For this deployment, I want a virtual machine that provides me about 1 terabyte disks. Let's put in 1,000 gigabytes. I also want 3,000 IOPS, and I want about 8 disks for this deployment. Let's add the disks. And now, let's see what recommendation we receive. Let's click Next. Now, before we make a recommendation, we are going to look at the type of operating system. I want to choose SUSE Linux Enterprise with 24-hour support. Let's click Next and see our recommendation. Oh, I also need to choose my region. Within the United States, I am going to select the East region. So let's open this up and choose the East. Perfect. Let's cancel that and let's say Next. And my recommendation is showing M416. These machines, 416 virtual CPUs, and I get 8 gigabytes of RAM, temporary storage. That's great. But look at the price of that virtual machine with Intel. I could also look at the recommended virtual machines. And again, I can see 2 more choices for this deployment. As you can see, the virtual machine selector is a great way for you to identify the type of virtual machines based on the type of workloads that you want to deploy. Now that we have reviewed the virtual machines, let's also talk about the migration strategies. One of the key elements of the migration is choosing either a horizontal or a vertical migration. What does that mean? If we look at the type of deployments that we have, majority of SAP deployments, they are going to be based on existing environments that you already have. And when we look at the overall customer deployment, we look at the 80-20 rules. That means when you look at your overall deployment, 20% of that could potentially be production, while 80% of the deployment, it is non-production. So what is a vertical and a horizontal deployment? Again, this will be based on the type of function, the business function. Maybe I have my ERP, and when I say vertical means maybe I have a production, a dev and test and a training environment. And I also look from a horizontal approach, which means maybe I see my sandbox across all of my deployments. So which one of these is the best for my deployment or for my migration? Well, if I look at my ERP, my Enterprise Resource Planning, or my GTS, my Global Trade Services, these are critical services. I may not want to choose to deploy them right up front in using all the verticals, be able to take production and test and dev. So for that, I may choose a horizontal approach. In that case, I may take just a sandbox across all of these environments and say, okay, could be called the low-hanging fruit to migrate to the cloud. That's like moving a floor, picking a building and moving a floor at a time, as opposed to a vertical migration where I want to move production, test, everything at once. This increases the risk and also has greater impact to your customers. It's like, again, like moving the building, but this time choose an entire building to move, maybe a smaller building. That's be your choice. So when I look at the type of migration, it is a selection that you would have to make for your deployment. Our recommendation is to look from perhaps a horizontal type of migration. And this, of course, allows you to learn from that migration and then begin and proceed with your critical system migration. At the same time, as you proceed with your migration, you notice that some of these resources, not all the resources, are going to be migrated. There will be systems that may still continue to reside on-prem, but when you look at the application and the database, they go together. That's something very important, and we'll be discussing this throughout these sessions. So the application database stay together, and you want to make sure that they stay in the same region, possibly in the same virtual network with that migration. As we look at the migration, let's take a quick look at a simple architecture component. This is a typical migration when we look forward to deploying our resources within Azure. And we're going to see this in the next session as well. On the left-hand side, you can see your on-prem deployment. This is where you have your existing systems. I have my gateways, and I'm connecting to Azure using ExpressRoute, which gives me a very nice dedicated pipe that can go from 50 megabits all the way to 100 gigabits per second. Within Azure, I have two regions. I have my primary region and I have my secondary region. In my primary region, I have my hub virtual network where I have deployed my critical systems like my firewall, my bastion hosts, and then I have my spoke virtual network where I'm deploying my SAP resources. I may have my application subnet and I have my database subnet. Within each one of these, I will have my dedicated virtual machines where I may have my clusters with load balancers, including my load balancers for my scale-up HANA. I may be able to use my HSR, HANA system replication, for synchronous replication within my primary region and for asynchronous replication across my secondary region. And for my virtual machines, I can also use Azure Site Recovery for complete system replication across secondary region. This type of deployment is going to be typical, and we're going to be seeing this in the next session. For this session, we are going to leverage the Architecture Center and take a look at the Azure Center for SAP Solutions. This is going to help us automate the deployment process. There are two objectives in this session. First, let's explore Architecture Center and see how we can leverage the examples and the best practices, and then the deployment using the ACSS, Azure Center for SAP Solutions. The learning objective is the Architecture Center. When we look at the Architecture Center, there are some key objectives that we can look at. First, we can look from a design perspective. The design for the cloud. I am trying to deploy a particular resource. I want to know specifically what I want to deploy, what are the best practices, what the customers have done. I will use this in the Architecture Center. We can also look at optimization. How do I optimize my workloads? Maybe I want to do application optimization or make a specific selection of the type of workloads that I want to deploy. I want to make a choice. Maybe I want a data exploration. Do I best use this for data, for virtual machines? How do I compare containers, compare application services? So these options are also available in the Architecture Center. And essentially, you have essential scenarios, example architectures. So let's take a quick look at Architecture Center. We access Architecture Center by going to learn.microsoft.com/Azure/architecture. In the Architecture Center, we are going to have the architectures. These are example architectures that we can use. Our teams are looking for a way to deploy an app service, deploy a new HANA deployment. I have example of architectures that I can use. Also concepts, specific best practices, and the how-to guides also available in the Architecture Center. There are times when we are looking for a specific, maybe I want to look for a design of a specific deployment. I wanted to optimize my workloads, and particularly, I want to look at specific technology areas. There are some popular articles. I have AI and machine learning, databases, analytics. So all types of deployments that you're looking for to expedite and to give you best practices, they are going to be available in the Architecture Center. For example, let's go up here on the very top, and I'm going to open the architectures, browse the sample architectures. This is the area where I can look for specific examples of something that I want to build. As we are talking about SAP, let's take a look at NetWeaver. Maybe I want to type in SAP first, and let's see how many solutions I can find that relate to SAP. I found 37 examples of solutions. Here's an SAP NetWeaver on SQL. Once I select this architecture, now it puts us in the Architecture Center, where it describes the solution in detail. Potential use cases, the architecture with Visio files that you can use for your own deployment, also the data flow for this deployment, and the components. Each component is described separately. In this particular example, just the virtual machines. But this is a good example for you to use the Architecture Center. Also, if you're looking for best practices, you can browse the architectures. You can also look at landing zones, applications, application architectures, and well-architected framework also available here. Now that we've discussed the Architecture Center, let's go back to the simple architecture that we revisit in the first session. This architecture component, let's go into a little more detail. First, if you look at the virtual networks and the subnets, our recommendation when we are looking at deployment in Azure is that we leverage the option of using larger virtual networks and then multiple subnets within it, as opposed to deploying our workloads in multiple smaller virtual networks. This includes delays because I had to peer my virtual networks. So with that, in this example, we are using a spoke network that is very large to accommodate our virtual machines. So you can see that I have my web dispatcher pool, I have my central services, I also have my application services, and I have my HANA database, each one on their own subnets. So the virtual networks and the NICs on these machines are conducive to the deployment. And I want to find the type of virtual machines, as we spoke, memory optimized, that have the proper amount of NICs to be able to accommodate these networks. With that, I also look at the virtual machines. In this example, we have the jump box, which is I could deploy my own machine. I can also select my Azure Bastion as a service. The domain controllers need to be deployed. This is something to consider on your environment. I look at the SAP central services, the app service, the dispatcher, and SAP HANA. So again, each one of these will be in their own subnets. Now, from a load balancing perspective, notice that not all systems do require or deployed with a load balancer. But once I deploy my load balancer, I will also be looking at application gateways. Load balancers are layer 4, application gateway are layer 7. So the example of my web dispatcher, I may want to put an application gateway as opposed to just a load balancer. This allows me to have better control of the application layer. Maybe filter based on query strings, based on the type of web traffic coming into my environment. Also, availability sets. This is going to be very important. When I have my virtual machines, I want to increase my availability, I'm going to use availability sets. I may also use availability zones. Availability sets are critical within the same region, where I have my fault domains with my own racks, and I have my update domains with individual groups of machines that I can control. Now, the availability zones provide me greater availability because now I can have multiple machines deployed across the zones. And with that, every time I use an availability set or an availability zone, I will be looking at deploying load balancers in front of these machines. So in this example, perhaps I could use 2 availability zones. One availability zones, I'll put one machine, another one, I put the other machine. If I have multiple of those, I can use all 3 availability zones and ensure better resilience of my environment. Now, the NSGs. NSGs are network security groups. When I deploy my environment, I will be looking at protecting each one of these segments. NSGs are like your ACLs, access control list, and I'll be deploying those within each one of these segments to ensure that I have proper traffic balance to be able to go in and out of this environment. Now, from a deployment perspective, we recommend that you use NSGs as opposed to using appliances for your web filtering, for example, your traffic filtering. Avoid doing those in between your applications and your databases. So NSGs are okay. Appliances like firewalls are not an acceptable option to be able to deploy here. The disks in your storage, for example, as I select the disks on my virtual machines, I will be choosing disks that are appropriately sized for each of my deployments. With that, I may also be looking at the disks and the files where they are going to be replicated across the region. For the disks, I'll be able to choose the type of disks, maybe Ultra, and maybe also the premium disks. For all the SAP deployments, we always make a recommendation to use premium disks. Premium disks will provide a much greater speed, throughput, and resilience as well. Now, just remember, when I use the premium disks, I do have local redundant storage or I have zone redundant storage. Right? That's one of the options you need to take in consideration. Also, on your secondary region, we did mention leveraging your site recovery to be able to replicate your virtual machines. So each one of these machines I can replicate on a region of my choice. But in this case, the region is going to be other than the region where the resources are currently located. So if I'm going to use ASR and my location is in the east, I will then be able to select another region. You will be able to make that selection. And always remember about the region pair from the storage replication perspective. Lastly, we talked about the express route and the gateways. Express route are a great way for you to connect your on-prem environment to Azure because it provides dedicated. It doesn't provide a encrypted, but it's a dedicated channel. Now, in this case, this dedicated circuit could be from 50 megabits all the way to 100 gigabits link. And I can work with, or in this case, you can work with a partner or a service provider, and these circuits are available globally. Now, one of the things that we're going to notice on this deployment is the availability of the HSR, the HANA site replication or system replication. Now, if I want to have synchronous replication of my database, I can use HSR in the same region, in the same subnet. When I want cross-region replication, I will be able to use asynchronous HSR replication. Even though I may be considering using Azure Site Recovery for virtual machine replication, I may, at the database level, continue to use database-specific replication, such as if I use HANA, I will be using HSR for my system replication. Now, earlier we talked about SAP RISE. Now, the example of architecture that we just spoke is an IS type of infrastructure, where you made a deployment, you decided where you want to deploy, you chose your region, you chose your network, your subnets, your virtual machines, your NICs, all your choice. When it comes to RISE, RISE is a service. And with that, you are going to be limiting to which service you want, and it will be deployed by SAP. In this example, on the right-hand side, I have the SAP RISE subscription. So when you purchase RISE, which is built, supported, and maintained by SAP, it will be deployed on its own subscription and its own tenant. Within that, you notice that I can deploy my servers, my DNS servers. I have my HANA, I have my resources, and all of these resources are going to be deployed inside of the RISE environment. You are going to connect to this RISE environment through VNet peering. You're going to peer with these connections. Across this peering connection, I will be able to pass on services like DNS. In this example here, I want to be able to do a DNS lookup, and doing that lookup on-prem. So what happens? I may have my DNS servers, binding servers in RISE. I will have my DNS server, maybe my domain controllers in there, and I have my servers on-prem. Now, I can do my zone transfers, and I can do my cross-region lookup following this approach. Now, notice that no SAP resources are deployed within your own subscription. With that, you're going to have components in your spoke network, and these are all non-SAP resources. So all of your SAP resources are going to be in their own subscription, and you are going to be connecting through it via a peering connection. This is a very popular deployment. SAP RISE is on the rise, lots of customers deploying it, and I hope that this is a way for you to see how this connection can take place. I'm going to open the documentation for this integration, and you are going to see that there are multiple ways to make this integration. In this particular example, we are using DNS. But if we are not using DNS, there is still connections. Maybe you want to have just a connection to the internet from your RISE and from your non-SAP systems. So let's take a quick look at the RISE page with our integration. Now here, we are in the SAP, in the learnmicrosoft.com, in the SAP on Azure documentation. Under the documentation, we are going to find, scrolling to the left, under the section Deployment, we are going to see SAP RISE integration. If I scroll to the top, notice this integrating SAP RISE workloads. Notice that we talk about the support. What type of supports do we have? So connecting to your SAP RISE will be one of the first steps. I have my SAP RISE ECS deployment. This is an example. So on the left-hand side, if you notice, I have my on-prem environment. I am using, not exactly an on-prem, this is within Azure, but I have my virtual network, and I am peering with the RISE environment. Next, let's take another example here. This one is not differentiated. This is a basic deployment, but this one will be able to differentiate a little bit more. Now, in this example, we have the peering connection, but I'm also using firewall to define what type of traffic is going to go in and out or from the SAP RISE environment. In this example, I have a connectivity back to on-prem, where I am using perhaps ExpressRoute or site-to-site VPN, and I have my ExpressRoute or VPN gateways providing that connectivity. So in this case, your VNet peering connection will allow traffic coming from your RISE environment to on-prem. If I go down the list, we have another example. So this one, we are looking at the DNS integration, SAP RISE ECS. This is the example that we just saw in our slide. Let's go down a little bit more. We are going to look at the internet outbound for your SAP RISE ECS. So in this example, we can see that the virtual machines that are in the non-SAP as well as the RISE environment do have internet connection. And again, remember that this management of the RISE environment is provided by SAP. There are many more examples of the RISE integration in this module. I hope you can see them and you can find the one that best suits your need. Now that we have reviewed the IaaS implementation with your Architecture Center, and we were able to see the sample deployment with your on-prem and then your Azure deployment and your RISE deployment. Now let's take a look at the AS or ACSS, which is Azure Center for SAP Solution. This is a service that we just released that will help you automate the process of deploying your workloads in Azure. For this session, we want to look at the SAP solution leveraging the best practices for this deployment. So when we look at leveraging the IaaS deployment, I am responsible for all the deployment, the virtual machines, the networks, the NICs, everything is my responsibility. Now, when I look at deploying this using the ACSS, this is going to be an automated. This is a guided approach to the process. I tell it my SID, I will tell where I want to deploy, how I want it to be, and the recommendations are going to be there, and the deployment is going to be based on best practices. So there is an intelligent and seamless management approach to it as well. I can manage my ACSS environment not only as individual virtual machines, but as at the SID level. I can shut down all the systems at once, and I can monitor the availability and the resources all at once as well. This is really the foundation for innovation. As I mentioned, it will allow you to save a lot of time and effort in deploying this environment. Now, the Center for SAP Solution. When I look at this deployment, notice that I mentioned we can choose an SID. Within this SID, I can then choose my ASCS, my app instances, and my database systems. You have two choices for this deployment. One, you can be presented based on the size of the system. Supposedly you say, I want X number of SAPs for my environment. We will then provide you a recommendation based on that. Machines for the ASCS, machines for your app instances, and machine for your database. If you choose high availability, if you choose a production or non-production, so the compute, the storage, the networking will all be deployed at once. Now, we mentioned now here from a contextual perspective, your SAP deployment automation framework is leveraged. Also, SAP monitoring, your health checks and monitoring for availability, a cost. I can see how much this entire environment is costing me. And of course, I can integrate with backup and Sentinel if I want for systems management, in this case, security management. One of the things we're going to do now is go through the ACSS deployment. So I'm going to go through that process, and then when it comes to the time of installing the software, I'm going to provide you a quick video that shows from that step forward. But up to that point, I'm going to go through it and give you the best practices. This really is going to open up the opportunity for you to see where you can save time and effort in deploying using ACSS. Now, in terms of the tools, notice that we talk about integration. So I do have quality checks, I have integrations and inventory of multiple services, and including the frameworks. So if I look at the enterprise scalability, I can leverage my auto-scaling capabilities. I also look at my well-architected frameworks that I can use from Architecture Center. And of course, I can do my deployment checklists. Right? In the Architecture Center, in our documentation, we have these detailed in terms of like a project where you can deploy these resources in entirety, using the Center for SAP Solutions or individual components as well. So let's take a quick look at the demo. For this demonstration, let's open the Azure portal and start our installation from there. From here, I have my subscription already configured, but this is my environment. So let's go ahead and open the portal, accessing portal.azure.com. Within the portal, to access the Azure Center for SAP Solutions, we are going to type in the search bar ACSS, or Azure Center for SAP Solutions. Notice that I do not have any solution currently deployed. I can very well create a brand new system in Azure, and I can also register existing SAP systems in the ACSS. So these are two choices. If I already have this system, I do have a template, a framework, where I can leverage and integrate them. If not, I can start from scratch. That's what we are going to do. We are going to create a new SAP system. Once you begin the process of creating the new SAP system, the very first deployment is going to be creating the virtual instance. So we're creating a representation of your SID. This is an instance. Under this instance, you're going to find all of your components. First, we're going to select the subscription where it's going to install. This is your subscription. Now, once you begin your deployment, it is critically important that you also understand that you have already created or you have already verified your quota on your subscription. You need to have enough sizes of the virtual machines that you can deploy in your subscription. So always validate that before your initial deployment. For this deployment, it is also necessary that you have a virtual network already created. If you're going to use, and you will be using, storage for your deployment types, depends on your availability. It's important that you already have a storage account created as well, and that storage account will need to be for your data lake. So you need to create a data lake storage with NFS to be able to use. And another requirement, these are part of the requirements that you would know in your documentation. Another requirement is you are going to have managed identities. So make sure that if you are going to use your user-assigned managed identities, that you create them in advance as well. All right, let's start from the top and begin this process. I have already created my network, I have my identities, I have my storage account. So first, we're going to select the resource group. I am going to choose the resource group VTD, the Virtual Training Day East, as my resource group. The instance name. This is the name of my SID. I am going to choose this as EE1 as my SID. For the region, we are going to stay within the US East. Now notice that not all the regions are available for this deployment. I'm going to choose just the US East at this point. Now, what type of deployment that I want to do? Again, I can select a production deployment, which allows me to select high availability and disaster recovery, and I can also select a non-production. For this example, I will do a non-production deployment. So SAP products, we are going to select S/4HANA. The database, we're going to choose HANA. Now, the scale method, we're going to choose scale up. This is recommended. In fact, I cannot deselect this option. Next is the deployment type. Deployment type, we're going to select distributed, but not high availability. Next, I'm going to choose my network. As I have already created my network, I'm going to pick my VTD ACSS VNet. I created an application subnet, so let's choose the app subnet. And the database subnet, I will choose the DB subnet. Next, the operating system. For this example, I am going to choose SUSE Enterprise 15SP3 for both the application and the database. So let's choose 15SP3. Now that we have chosen the operating system, let's choose the transport directory where we are going to be installing components and sharing amongst the systems. We can choose to create a new transport directory or use an existing directory. For our example, we chose to create a new transport directory. The transport directory resource group, we are going to choose the same resource group that we are deploying ACSS. Next is the storage account name. What's the name for my transport directory? Let's call it VTD, all lowercase, VTD ACSS demo store 1. That's the name we choose. Remember, the name must be unique across Azure. This is unique. It did not give us any concerns. Next, administration of the account. As we know from virtual machines, we are going to be using Linux, and with that, we need to have the SSH keys. I have already created the SSH keys, and we are going to use them. The user, I'm going to leave as Azure user, and the SSH key, I can either generate or I can use an existing key pair. I'm going to choose an existing public key, and I'm going to also choose an existing private key. So SSH key from a file, or I can choose to paste the SSH key. In this example, I'm going to paste the SSH key that I already have. I'm going to open my Cloud Shell, and in here, I'm going to do an ls. Notice that I have my ACSS key, private and public. Let's go ahead and take a look at the public one. So let's cat ACSS key.pub. Here's my key. Let's copy that key. It's okay for me to share this key today because it is only for the demo. Let's minimize, and let's paste the key right there. Next, we're going to choose the private key. So let's go ahead and paste the private key as well. Back to Cloud Shell. Let's open up and see the private key. So let's do a cat ACSS key, and let's copy this key. Let's go up a little bit. There it is. This is my key. Control C. And let's paste the key that is private. Very well. Now the SAP FQDN. For this example, we are going to choose acssdemo.com, where you choose your organization. For managed identity, we can choose an existing managed identity, or we can create a new managed identity. I have already created a managed identity, so I'm going to choose that one. Remember, the managed identity must have contributor access to the storage and to your subscription in order to be able to be used. Next is the virtual machines. Now, to choose the virtual machines for your deployment, I can choose to generate a recommendation based on the size that I want, based on SAPs, or I can manually enter the virtual machines. For this example, let's choose based on SAPs, the SAP application. So how many SAPs do I need? Supposedly, I'm looking for very small, 2,000 SAPs. And that's it. What about memory? Maybe I'm looking for 600 gigabytes of RAM. Let's generate a recommendation. Now, again, it's important that once the recommendation is made, that we have enough virtual machine in our quota for your subscription. So as you can see, the example here, it says ASCS, it is a recommendation of using the E4D virtual machines. I can select that size, or I can choose a different size as well. So there are many options for me to choose from. For the application server, I'm also browsed with a ED4 virtual machine. Again, one virtual machine for ASCS and one for the application server. Also for the database, we have a standard M64 selection. Again, that is a recommendation that we validate that we have enough resources in our quota. Once this is done, and I'm comfortable, I can also look at the disks. So let's see what disk recommendation was made. I see that I have 256 gig disks, 4 of them. This is for HANA data, log, shared. I have also SAP and backup in the OS. So as you can see, the recommendation was made. I can choose to select these disks and the quantity, and I can make changes as well. For now, I'm going to leave the selection as is. Once the selection is made, before we start the deployment process, we can visualize the architecture. So here, I can see where my systems are going to be deployed and which style they are. I can also zoom in and out on my architecture. Now, it looks like I made a mistake on my virtual machine. Let's see what it is. Standard M64. Disks. No, I don't see a mistake in there. All right. So when I am visualizing the architecture, I should be able to start the deployment. This is where we are going to stop, and we are going to play a quick video demonstrating what the results are and how you can go about deploying your software using the ACSS environment.
Not only are you able to deploy the right infrastructure for your SAP system, but you also have options for installing SAP software. Azure Center for SAP Solutions provides a simple and easy installation experience with minimal configuration inputs. It supports S/4HANA installation and setup for HA, including the configuration of HA cluster. The guided deployment provides a step-by-step visibility into the installations process. Once the installation is completed, you get a virtual representation of the SID that you just deployed. For the thousands of customers already running on Azure, not only can you deploy new SAP systems, but you can also register existing ones. Azure Center for SAP Solutions allows you to auto-discover your existing SAP systems deployed on Azure and register them to unlock management capabilities and other integrated Azure services. With the virtual representation of your registered SID, you can easily navigate and interact with the SAP components, including the central instance, application instance, and database instance. Detailed SAP information for managing the system is available on the Properties section, where you can see the SAP status and health, as well as the underlying virtual machine health from a single place. Now, with the virtual representation of your SAP system, you can monitor the health and status of your SAP workloads. You can also get the health and status of each SAP system and its components. You can also get aggregated metrics and insights about your SAP systems, instances, and underlying infrastructure with Azure Monitor, such as VM CPU utilization for the application and database tiers, and the disk IOPS for the database. Beyond the infrastructure metrics, Azure Monitor for SAP Solutions, an Azure native monitoring product that provides comprehensive insights into your entire SAP landscape, is also integrated. Right from the virtual instance of your SID, you can create a new Azure Monitor for SAP Solutions resource or register an existing one. A capability of Azure Center for SAP Solutions is the ability to start and stop your SAP systems at the SID or instance level, eliminating the need to operate the system from multiple tools. You can also manage who can start and stop your SAP systems or perform other operations through Azure role-based access control. With each SAP system represented as an Azure resource, customers get a bird's-eye view of their SAP landscapes, including their status and health, which makes it easy to discover, manage, and monitor their entire SAP estate on Azure. To ensure that your system is compliant with SAP and Microsoft best practices, Azure Center for SAP Solutions provides insights based on quality checks. These insights can be accessed from the Quality Insights Workbook in the Virtual Instance for SAP Solutions overview. Here, you can drill down to VM-level insights while maintaining the context of your SAP system. The ever-increasing list of quality checks that Azure Center for SAP Solutions performs validates the SAP system configuration for the Azure infrastructure and for the VM's operation system. Any deviations from best practices are flagged immediately through Azure Advisor, with recommendations to help you correct the configurations and boost the reliability and performance of your SAP applications. The Quality Insights Workbook brings together all insights from varied resources comprised in an SAP system and presents them in an aggregated fashion at the system level, making it easy for you to increase the quality and reliability of your SAP workloads on Azure through the single pane of the virtual instance for SAP Solutions. The quality check recommendations are integrated with Azure Advisor. You can set alerts for ACSS recommendations from Azure Advisor by navigating the Advisor recommendation page on the child instances, or from the Azure Advisor page in the Azure portal. That way, you will never miss a recommendation and ensure that your SAP systems on Azure are always running on the highest of quality. With Azure Center for SAP Solutions, it is now simple and easy to view the cost of running an SAP system. Integrated into the virtual instance for SAP Solutions resource is a cost view of the SAP system based on the aggregated cost of the underlying non-shared compute, network, and storage resources. With your SAP systems now represented in Azure, Azure Resource Graph gives you the ability to search and get visibility across your entire SAP estate. For example, here you can get a summarized view of production and non-production SAP systems. You can also search for other Azure resources, such as virtual machines, while maintaining the context of your SAP system. This query shows you how you can drill in further to get a summarized view of kernel version and patch information for all your SAP instances across various SIDs, all the virtual machines associated with a particular SAP system or virtual instance. While you can deploy and manage your SAP solutions with the guided portal-based experience, you can also take advantage of standard Azure tools such as CLI, PowerShell, and APIs to integrate with or build your solutions. The choice is yours.
Now that you have seen the Azure Center for SAP Solutions, ACSS, how it works, I was able to build the infrastructure, and the video also showed you how you are going to install the software. Remember the prerequisites, and it completed that visualization with your monitoring. This gives us leadway to the next discussion point, which is the AMS, which is Azure Monitor for SAP Solution. This solution is designed specifically to monitor the SAP environment that you have deployed in Azure. This is a free service that will be able to monitor beyond those elements that Azure Monitor provides. So Azure Monitor is our flagship product for monitoring your environment. Classical alerts, your metrics, like the usual suspects, CPU, memory, disk, network, all of those classic metrics and alerting is available through Azure Monitor. Now, when you add the AMS, now we are talking about SAP-specific telemetry. I can see from HANA database telemetry. I can also look at Microsoft SQL. I can look at high availability of your clusters. We can see the operating systems. And I can also see the Azure regions where you have deployed your resources. So this service will be in conjunction with other services. So you are going to deploy, let's say, functions to be able to look at these alerts and then take action. You have storage. You also have your alerting systems from that. So with this allows me to monitor my environment holistically. There are a key number of metrics that you are going to be able to deploy and manage with AMS. But AMS, from these components, from an architectural deployment, as I mentioned, again, is a free service. But AMS is going to leverage log analytics. So all those events and the metrics that we're collecting directly into log analytics for analysis of your environment. Also, the collector VM. This is a virtual machine that is going to be deployed to be able to capture and talk to the resources. The Key Vault, because we are going to be leveraging the Key Vault to hold on to those critical keys and passwords that you are going to be used to connect to the systems. So these components are going to be deployed as part of it, and you are going to be charged for the usage of those resources. But again, you can manage your HANA, you can manage your SQL Server, your pacemaker, and of course, your SQL. Now, let's see AMS in action.
SAP systems are one of the mission-critical applications for many enterprises, and any disruption of service or performance can result in significant financial and reputational impact on an organization. Customers have to spend a lot of time on identifying problems and finding out the root cause from multiple monitoring solutions used to monitor different application and infrastructure layers. Introducing Azure Monitor for SAP Solutions, an Azure native end-to-end SAP technical monitoring service. With Azure Monitor for SAP Solutions, you can monitor application, database, and Azure infrastructure all in one place. Azure Monitor for SAP Solutions helps you monitor availability, performance, and more for different layers of SAP application platforms. Setting up Azure Monitor for SAP Solutions is very easy. With just the click of a few buttons, you can set up Azure Monitor for SAP Solutions. All Azure Monitor for SAP Solutions needs are subscriptions and connection information with credentials to connect with SAP systems. And that's it. You can set up an SAP monitoring solution in just a few minutes. Azure Monitor for SAP Solutions allows you to set up secure communication with Transport Layer Security 1.2 between your SAP systems and Monitor. You can also use PowerShell or CLI to set up AMS. You can configure new providers from the Providers tab. You can check the list of all providers, and there you will also have the option to configure a new provider. For SAP NetWeaver, you first need to complete a few prerequisites. Once that is done, you can provide host details, SAP system and its connection details. You can monitor SAP NetWeaver, SAP HANA, Microsoft SQL Server, and IBM DB2 databases. You can also monitor infrastructure components like the high availability pacemaker cluster and Linux operating systems. Here you can see the historical availability trends, process analysis, and process level information. The SAP HANA provider will give you information about database performance. You can check database availability trends, system utilization, and other key insights around backup health replication status, as well as many other parameters. Azure Monitor for SAP Solutions provides you with predefined alerts templates. With these templates, you can define the alert trigger criteria and the choose notification mechanisms like sending emails, sending text messages, or creating tickets in an incident management solution. Troubleshooting and finding the root cause of these problems takes a lot less time, thanks to the SAP Insights preview feature. With SAP Insights, you can see all the availability and performance issues that were detected and check all of the attributes which can help you investigate and find the root cause for those problems. Insights not only provides SAP-level metrics, but also shows relevant Azure infrastructure metrics to help with troubleshooting these issues. Want to know how all of your SAP systems are doing at a glance? SAP Landscape Monitor can provide you with that information. You can create a group of SAP systems based on environment, domain, or importance, and see their health based on alerts raised. You can also check out the list of alerts triggered based on group or specific SAP system below. Azure Monitor for SAP Solutions is available now with no licensing fee. Go to Azure and check out the Azure Monitor for SAP Solutions service today.
In summary, for this session, we were able to see the Architecture Center. We navigated the architectures. We also see how to access multiple resolutions or options within the Architecture Center. We also see the ACSS. We saw that in action, and we saw how to deploy and configure the software as well. And lastly, we close with a video of AMS that clearly gives you opportunity to manage your entire deployment once you begin and continue with your migration. For this session, let's discuss securing your environment as you begin your cloud migration. First, we are going to talk about the SAP, securing your SAP cloud as you are in Azure, and let's explore Microsoft Sentinel solution. When we start a discussion in terms of securing your cloud environment, the first item that we need to cover is identity. So when you look at the identity, be able to manage your services in terms of authentication and authorization deployment. Today, you have your systems that are already configured on-prem. They are connected to your Active Directory domain services. You have your forest already pre-configured. You have all of your domain services configured. You have your authentication. Your systems come up. They register with your domain services. You have all of your domain controllers configured. You do not want to replace that. So when you come into Azure, if you want to preserve that, continue to use the same type of configuration with identity and directory services, we have a managed service in Azure, which is called Azure ADDS, Azure Active Directory Domain Services. This is a managed service where you're going to have the domain services with the domain controllers, a pair of domain controllers. You also have this as a deployment within the Azure environment that is managed by Microsoft. So you have your OU, you have a control over your OU. You can then have your systems register, your client register, and join that domain and that forest. So this is one type of deployment. But when you deploy the Active Directory domain services, you are going to create a new forest within Azure. So you already have one that is on-prem. You have a second forest for your Azure deployment. Another way for you to deploy would be leveraging the Entra identity. This is what the previous service that we used to call Azure Active Directory. Azure Active Directory is a cloud-centric authentication system. So now it is comparable to what you have on-prem if you think about from a directory perspective, but on-prem I was using protocols like NTLM and Kerberos, and those are legacy protocols. On the other hand, Entra Identity is a cloud-centric service. It is designed for scalability of the cloud. Billions of authentication are happening with Entra on a daily and weekly basis. It is a flat type of directory. It is not hierarchical like you see the directory services, but also uses it doesn't use NTLM, but it would use your OpenID Connect and OAuth authentication as the protocols for that authentication. So when we talked about deployment in Azure and leveraging Azure-centric authentication, we are going to be looking at Active Directory. Now, if you are using your traditional Active Directory domain services on-prem, and now you are deploying Entra Identity, you can still synchronize those identities. So I can have pass-through authentication for my users. I can have users register or join my domains, and we can make this hybrid authentication between the two. And for that, you look at the third deployment option, which is the Microsoft Entra Domain Services. This is what you have on-prem, which is also being relabeled to domain services. So we have the Active Directory Domain Services as a service. We have Entra Identity that is cloud-centric, and we also have what we continue to use on-prem. So there are three ways for us to do that. Now, the Active Directory Domain Services that we provide as a service has the same capabilities that you see from your Entra domain services, but also integrate with Entra Identity. So now I can have my systems as they join. They'll be able to join my domains. They'll be able to register my domains, and my users I'll be able to synchronize. So when we look at migration into Azure, I can look at preserving what we have or moving on to a cloud-centric identity services. This is one way that we can begin to look at it. So let's take a quick look at the documentation for Microsoft Entra and see all the capabilities that we can identify that you can use as you begin your cloud journey. This is the Microsoft Entra ID documentation. Again, this is the Microsoft Active Directory Azure AD. If you remember, the name has been changed to Microsoft Entra ID. In this site, you see that I have an overview. What is exactly Entra to describe the service? What is the Microsoft Identity Services? We have some concepts. And then I can look at the security, Microsoft Zero Trust discussion, the overview, the best practices. and also learning modules. We also find the Architecture Center link from here and Microsoft Graph. Below, we are going to find user identity. So I have the fundamentals, architectures, privileged identity management. So it depends on the level that you procure for your Entra identity. Could also be a free module that gives you a certain number of authentications. Can also be a premium 1 version that can give you certain level of privileges, and then a premium 2 version that has privileged identity management and elevated services. In this area, you can also find control and access. So this is the entire documentation where if you are interested in deploying for the cloud, deploying your Entra identity, this will help you with that architectural deployment. Now, when we look at Microsoft and the defending of your services, one of the key service for security within Azure is going to be Microsoft Defender for security implementation. So Microsoft Defender is one of the services that centralized all the security components for all managed resources that we have in your subscription, in your environment. And Defender for Cloud is not just for Azure Cloud. It is a multi-cloud deployment. If you are managing AWS, you are managing GCP, you can then have a centralized cloud management service. That allows you to install agents and manage the components where they are. Now, when you deploy Defender for Cloud, you need to begin to procure specific modules for your deployment. But Defender will look at your deployment from 3 specific lenses. First of all, you will have continuous assessment of your environment. You'll continue to monitor based on your services that you have deployed, your networks, your virtual machines, your services, your containers, your applications. All of those will be continually monitored. Also, it looks from a security perspective. You'll be able to secure those resources. Maybe you have MFA enabled, maybe you did not. If it is not enabled, it will have recommendations for you on how to go about deploying, configuring these. You have deployed your Linux systems for your SAP deployment. You need to make sure you have followed best practices. You have the monitoring agent, security agents, and in this case, Defender for Cloud will be able to identify those areas and also show you how to resolve them. And that is another area from a defense perspective. Not only Defender for Cloud will show you where these gaps can exist, but it will also show you recommendation and steps to resolve this, to mitigate these concerns. Let's take a close look at the documentation for Defender for Cloud. This will give us some clarity of what additional support is available. Here in Microsoft Learn, we have Defender for Cloud. So in this documentation, we can discuss Defender for Cloud, how it is supported. Let's look at the architecture. So Defender for Cloud, unified DevOps. So I have my security engineering, I have my strengthening of my cloud providers, also protecting all my workloads, right? And we did mention about AWS, Azure, and other cloud providers as well. Securing the cloud, some of these options. We can talk about the type of services that is supported, improve your security posture, centralized policy management, secure scope, and also multi-cloud coverage. As we go down the list, protecting your cloud workloads. So I want to be able to protect my virtual machines, my identity, my resources, my network, my containers, so we can see all the resources that can be available for monitoring. Also, if I go back up a little bit into the documentation, let's go back up here, we can see on the left-hand side important upcoming changes. This is important for us, but common questions about the Microsoft Defender. So I want to be able to see maybe there are some updates that I want to identify, new services, and particularly how to deploy. How do I go about the deployment of Defender for Cloud? I'm going to stop here. Let's go back into the presentation so we can continue with Purview. So for this session, let's explore Microsoft Sentinel and solutions for SAP. So Microsoft Sentinel is our, when we look at the modern threat protection tool from a SIEM perspective, a security event management, that's what Sentinel is. So Sentinel allows you to do a cloud-native monitoring of all of your resources. It is powered by AI, so be able to identify, do threat hunting, and of course, do cross-platform review of your security posture. So this is going to be not only on Azure, but also I call this a multi-cloud deployment. The way Sentinel works, it will sit on top of Log Analytics. So Log Analytics will be able to bring in logs from various resources within Azure, from on-prem, from other clouds, and then when Sentinel is configured, I will be able to mine and understand all those correlations between these logs. They could be from resources like virtual machines. They could be from identity resources like Entra. They could also be from security resources or from agents installed on virtual machines. So from a Sentinel perspective, I can do detection of those security concerns. I can also take action. I can integrate with other resources. I can even integrate Sentinel with Teams or other resources to be able to collaborate in this threat hunting. So the investigation and the threat monitoring is all centrally located. From that, we look at the infrastructure. So all the infrastructure component, all the resources, the users, the applications, and of course the domains. If we look at it from all the authentication and user resources that we are managing, this is a centralized view that is available in Sentinel. Now, Sentinel monitoring, this is a preview specifically for SAP. This Sentinel monitoring will be able to continuously monitor the SAP environment, the systems that we are deploying. I will also be able to detect the threats that are available, out-of-the-box detection. I will be able to demonstrate some of these. And I also have a video to demonstrate this in action coming up in a few minutes. Correlated SAP monitoring against other signals as well. And of course, you can build your own detection. You can customize your detection within Sentinel. So let's take a look at Sentinel inside of your portal to see how it will be configured. Now that I have logged into my Azure portal, we are going to navigate to Sentinel. We were in Defender for Cloud. Now we are going to click Sentinel. When I look at Sentinel, here's my service, Microsoft Sentinel. Notice that I have already deployed a Sentinel in my environment. What if I want to deploy a new instance of Sentinel? All I need to do is I can select Create a New Instance. Now, when I select the creation of a new instance, I did mention that Sentinel works on top of Log Analytics. So the very first thing that it will ask you to do is create a new Log Analytics workspace where you are going to then activate Sentinel. So to select your Log Analytics workspace, you're going to select your subscription, you're going to select your resource group, and then you're going to select your Log Analytics workspace name. For this example, let's choose Sentinel LA1, Log Analytics 1. And we're going to select this in the East Coast. And let's go ahead and review and create. So again, all that we are doing is selecting the Log Analytics workspace. So Sentinel sitting on top of Log Analytics workspace will then leverage all the logs that you're collecting in there. And of course, we're going to use the Custo language, KQL, to mine this data. Now, when my Log Analytics workspace is created, once it is done, the next step is to activate Sentinel for it. As I mentioned, I already have a Sentinel configured, so I'm going to open that Sentinel. Oh, look at that. My Log Analytics workspace is complete. So let's take a look at it. So we can go to the resource, and let's go back to Log Analytics workspace, or type in Sentinel one more time, and we'll see that we have a second Sentinel that will come up. Let's refresh this. All right. This is my original Sentinel that we configured. And when I configure the Sentinel, I can begin to see this is selected workspace called Sentinel. Incidents, workbooks, hunting, notebooks, these are begin to see options from a threat management. One of the first things we need to do if I want to begin to monitor my SAP workloads in Sentinel is go to the hub. In the hub, I can then select to add the SAP workloads. So from here, notice I have 309 solutions that I can add to Sentinel. So if I want to deploy my SAP, I will type in SAP. And we'll see this SAP application, and this is a featured application. This allows us to do identity and threat monitoring for SAP workloads. Let's select this one. Now here, because I already have the SAP configured, I can then click on Monitoring. In the monitoring, I can look at the cloud provider, and these are all the elements within Sentinel that I can monitor. Critical authorization assessment, I can look at multiple passwords. For each one of these, we'll see there is a policy, and there's a way that we are mining this data. So as the event comes into my Sentinel, I will be able to monitor that event. So this particular one, if I look at create a rule, I will be able to look at a specific rule to monitor this particular event. So I can select the rule name, a description for my rule, and I can then put in a logic. The logic in Sentinel will be the custom language or the query language that is going to go into your log tables and be able to identify the resources that you are looking for. In this example, this is looking for a syslog where process name is, start with HDB, where the syslog message contains audit configuration and so forth. So it depends on how you want to configure your customized log entries. This is the process that I'll go for that. Once I have my settings, I can then look at identifying incident settings, how this is going to be enabled or not. Once that is enabled, I'll be able to begin to collect this data. And then I can take automatic response. In the automatic response, I can choose what actions I want to take. So maybe I want to put a rule in there, and if this incident occurs, what do I want to do with that particular incident? So let's go back in here for a moment. I want to go back to Sentinel. I'm going to open up Sentinel one more time, and now I'm going to look at the incidents. Notice that I don't have any incidents yet. I have planned for the deployment of my SAP, but I have not configured all the detailed rules. They are active, but I don't have any incidents because I have not deployed the resources yet. Workbooks, as we saw this from Defender for Cloud, I can also configure specific workbooks, widgets, that allows me to view these events in particular dashboard elements. Maybe I want to see the specifics, maybe grouping of a particular type of event in a pie chart or in a line chart, for example. And of course, hunting. This is when I begin my hunting season for specific elements. Maybe I have a configure a particular solution where users logged in from multiple locations. I can then track the particulars. I don't know exactly what the event is, but I can begin my hunting process. Notebooks are critically important in Sentinel. So as we can see, I can leverage Jupyter notebooks. I can create those notebooks in Sentinel, and I can begin to use those notebooks to do mining of this data. So as we mentioned before, we can use machine learning, we can use AI for this kind of threat monitoring using the notebooks. Also, the threat intelligence. As I begin to look at the content, I can begin to monitor my threat intelligence. I identified a specific situation. I can then point to that specific situation and take action. I am going to stop here in the content of the Sentinel from Azure perspective. Next, let's take a look at the architecture of Sentinel, and then I will present you with a quick video that will go from end to end from a threat monitoring perspective. So from Microsoft Sentinel, from a solutions perspective, now I'm looking at the data collectors. And as we mentioned, we have a number of collectors, particularly for SAP. So we are looking at ABAP security audits, for example. I'm looking at ABAP changes. If you look at spool logs, I can also look at ABAP jobs. So from the language perspective, from monitoring of your deployment, I will be able to see these gaps in monitoring and then be able to identify them. Even if it is not a gap, if I particularly identify those elements that I want to be able to monitor. ABAP tables, for example, I can also look at syslogs, I can look at MyCM logs. So lots of logs from the out-of-the-box deployment that I can identify. So based on these, on the Sentinel, let's look at the architecture. In this example, this is an overall SIEM architecture with Microsoft Sentinel. Now, this particular one, notice the number of cybersecurity events that are monitored daily, 20 billion events. So how is this Microsoft internal Sentinel environment configured? Starting from the left, let me go ahead and choose my pen color here. I'm going to choose a blue again. So starting from the left, notice I have on-prem data and I have cloud data that is being fed into a log analytics workspace. As I mentioned, it always starts with a log analytics workspace. You pay by the amount of gigabytes of data, log data, that you are adding to Sentinel on a regular basis. Now, the built-in machine learning, as we pointed out, part of a Sentinel, I do have the capability of using machine learning, the notebooks, and of course, the pre-built modules for hunting and analysis detection. Now, the portal, from the portal perspective, the user, we have the scheduling of the rules. As you notice, I can do my specific watch lists. I can do my hunting. I can do my investigation. And also, don't forget, I can do all of this using my log analytics, my cross-cluster configuration. And I can also use Data Explorer to export this data outside of the environment. Now, all the incidents, once I have detected incidents, I can take a look at automation and do my case investigation, my case management on a regular basis. Now, the playbooks can be automations. I can enrich those playbooks with specific automation, specific machine learning as well. And this truly helps me with the security of the environment. Again, Microsoft has identified this type of environment. We used it, and we have made this available where customers can also choose to make this deployment. Now, when I look at integrated services, Microsoft Sentinel, we meant as a SIEM, as a security, identity, and event management from that perspective, not only from a cloud perspective, but also integrating with third-party deployments. So when you look at this deployment from Sentinel, we also look at Defender, the 365 Defender. So if I look at emails and docs or endpoints and identity, and of course, Microsoft Defender for Cloud. Microsoft Defender for Cloud is a holistic from a database, from systems, from containers and network monitoring. So this is a blueprint of how you look at it from an integrated systems monitoring and event monitoring within the cloud infrastructure. Next, let's take a look at Sentinel and SAP and Teams integration. This video is going to show you an end-to-end use of Sentinel for a threat monitoring.
We are here in the Microsoft Sentinel overview dashboard, where we can see the latest incidents for the last 24 hours. We can see automations that have been run. We can see a list of data that has been received by the connected systems, and also some additional analytics insights. Now, in this overview, or in Microsoft Sentinel, what we have done here, we have connected an SAP system to Microsoft Sentinel. So if I take a look here at all these connectors that are available, and if I just take a look at the ones that we have configured in this specific demo environment, you can see that we have configured here the Microsoft Sentinel for SAP connector. You can see the connector is actually retrieving information from the SAP system. We can see here that there are a few queries running. There are a lot of analytic rules available. We can see that we're getting lots of information from the SAP system, and we are connecting a lot of data types here. Now, what we can do is we'll switch to a user that is now acting or working in the SAP system. This user has certain things that the user is allowed to do, but the user is actually not allowed to call SE80, or he is allowed from an SAP perspective, but this might be a little complicated, or should raise a few concerns, because this user maybe is under observation or whatever. So in this specific case now, this user called the transaction SE80. What we'll see in a second is that Sentinel saw or detects this interaction, and it will actually come up with a notification in Teams. So we'll just wait for this for a second, and then we'll take a closer look at what actually happened in the background. So we just saw the adaptive card coming in, and we can see that there's a warning, severity high, that a privileged user, LockMe, executed a sensitive transaction SE80. So we can see here additional information, like where was it detected, in which system it is. And now what we can do, we can actually either flag this as a false positive, or we can go to block user on the specific system, and we can select whether we only want to block it in the ERP system, on the business technology platform, or even on the Azure Active Directory. And then we can just say, yeah, lock this user. So we can provide a command, and if I click on submit, then this user is now locked. So let's actually take a look at that. Switch over here to the SAP system, and we will go to a certain transaction to check the status of this user. Lock me. If I go here to display, if I go to log on data, we can see that this user is now locked in the SAP system. So from Teams, Sentinel had detected an issue in the SAP system. It sent a notification to Teams. The SAP Basis team was able to lock this user directly from Teams. And now, as you can see, the user is actually locked in the SAP system. Now, potentially the flow could continue. And in our specific case now, I can actually also unlock this user here. Unlocking again, everything okay. And then again, we can just trigger this directly from Teams, and we can unlock the user. But the important thing is that really this integration of Sentinel with SAP allowed us to monitor suspicious activities and then take some actions also in the SAP system. So if I just go back here again, let me double check this here. And if I go to log on data, then the user is now no longer locked. So if we take a closer look at the scenario of how this is done, if we go back here to our Microsoft Sentinel dashboard, then first of all, as we started before here, I have the overview of the incoming incidents and so on, and I can actually take a look at some of the incidents that were created. So here's a long list of the incidents, and in my specific case here, for example, there is this privileged user incident. I can actually, in this case, close this incident now, or I can also assign it to my user, so that's okay. And then I have all the relevant information directly here. The interesting thing is that this specific incident can actually trigger a specific flow. So if I go here to automations, you can see that we have here different automation flows, and one of them is block user with Microsoft Teams with an adaptive card. So basically what we're doing here with this automation book is if there is a specific incident, so when an incident is created and it contains this specific insights from the SAP system, then a playbook should be triggered. And this playbook is exactly the playbook, this logic app that then triggers off the creation of the adaptive card in Teams.
In summary, for this session, we were able to discuss securing your resources in the cloud. We started a discussion with Enter ID. We also talked about AADDS, which is your directory service in the cloud, where Microsoft managed that service. And we talked about the use of your on-prem type of deployment. With that, we also talked about Microsoft Defender for Cloud, and we discussed the Sentinel deployment. Now let's start looking at intelligent insights and AI-driven productivity for your SAP data. In this session, we are going to explore 3 learning objectives. First, we are going to explore the Power Platform. We're going to look at the data-driven AI integration, and we'll look at AI with SAP workloads. First, looking at the exploring of the SAP with Power Platform. When we look at the Power Platform, we're going to identify some key integration points for your Azure implementation. This is a solution built on a Power Platform, which allows you to really extract your SAP data from a diverse number of resources. Your SAP business specific projects can also take advantage of these. They take the solution one step farther when allowing you to connect with your resources. So the Power Platform is really a low-code, or we call it a no-code kind of platform, to really rapidly build your environment and, of course, customize your business solution. First, we have the Power Apps. And the Power Apps allows you to create connectors, create specific sources of data, and also allows you to amplify that data with the low-code programming. We have the Power Automate. The Power Automate is really the automation trigger. There are trigger-specific actions, no-code, low-code approach for you to take action and build specific AI capability. The Power Virtual Agent. Power Virtual Agent is a great agent. That's a chatbot, really can engage with your customers, be able to engage with your employees, leverage again the no-code graphical interface. And with that, we have the Power Pages. Power Pages design your configuration, publish your modern websites, configure your pages and your components specifically to the needs of your customer. And then, of course, we have Power BI. Power BI as being the graphical interface. This is where everything occurs. Your analytical central repository, your dashboards. This is where you begin to wow your customers with the visuals. So with that, I can see that these 900 plus collectors that are available, and also the integration with the Dataverse, that I can really mine all of this content, integration with the management tools, and of course, the AI builder and the Power FX. So with this, let's not forget about the integration with the security from an identity, authentication, and governance perspective. Now, the connectivity to the Power Platform. We did mention about the agents. So how does the Power Platform access the SAP data? Well, first of all, looking from the left-hand side, the SAP ERP systems. Now, in this case, I have my connectors. They do utilize the message servers, so I can invoke the APIs and begin to create and read and look at the specific data. I can also look at the flows. I can create my port configuration, get my export, and with that, I have my SAP my GUI, in this case RPA. I have my connectors, my O data connectors. So can Power Platform consume all of this O data? Of course it can. Or you can see from this perspective that yes, this is not completely public yet, but is under what we call private preview. But now, when I look at the ERP data, the connectors, they are readily available, right? They are ready for action. So I can begin to read the table and parse the content. What about the data gateways, right? Yes, I can look at the ERP connectors. I can look at my ERP tables, and I can then look at my REST APIs. All of this with my SAP data connectors. Now, when I look at the Power Platform and the integration using the API management, now one of the great advantages of the API management is the capability of doing this throttling. So not only I get my OS, my clients with their OS or their mobile devices, they can interact with the Power Platform, and now I can have custom connectors going through the API management. I can throttle back. I can say, okay, if you are my customer, I have unlimited amount of connections you can make. If you are a partner, maybe I can let you do 40 connections per minute. Not only I can do this signal throttling, I can also begin to look at the various features. I can do authentication. I can say if you are coming from this location, I want you to authenticate one way or another. So I can leverage in this case, Microsoft Entra Identity for authentication, the token exchange, the configuration of the gateways that allows me to really go down to specific calls on the API on the back end. So this is a great feature for us when it comes to integration into Azure. Now, one of the features when I look at it from the Power Platform, the low code, no code configuration of the Power Platform allows your agents or your developers to really provide specific access. If a developer wants to connect to specific resources on the back end, maybe there are certain types of authentication that I want to be able to carry on. So the API is part of this building platform, and I can then secure my environment from day one. Now the Power BI, part of the Power Platform. And now if we look at the Microsoft Fabric as well, Power BI is a key element with that. Powerful combination of the dashboards that allows me to look at the data, combine the data with various data sources, and I'm able to see this. Now the Power BI seamlessly provide this connector, the SAP and non-SAP data. So from two perspectives, perhaps I can leverage the extraction of the SAP data, bringing that using my data factory, for example, creating the connectors, and then building my ETL pipeline, bringing this into a data warehouse. And now I can point Power BI to the data warehouse, or I can even use Synapse Analytics for that to customize my data even further. And then I can have conversation with my data and visualization of this data right into Power BI. Now, in terms of the Power BI and mining this data, I can visualize this data in various formats. Now, one of the ways that we are going to see this is by looking at this real-time analysis of a Power Platform using the Azure OpenAI. For this example, we're going to start from the very beginning on the left-hand side. So here's an example of very query. I have an order assistant, a bot that was created, and I want you to look at from a user perspective. Are there any months where the sales dropped significantly? So that's a question that I need to really understand the data in order to get this working. So the user starts submitting this prompt. It's going to go into the Azure OpenAI from a query perspective. The application, in this case the developer, will be able to look at the API, the framework, and be able to ask the question. The query is going to go directly to the API platform. Now, with collaboration with the Azure OpenAI, I can then have the application interface evaluate the user response. Maybe I can enrich this data. I can look at the Synapse Analytics tables that have been provided. And this Synapse Analytics table came from the data factory through this CI/CD pipeline. So beginning on the very far right where I have my HANA, my sales order, I can input that data directly from the CDC connector, come through the data factory, export it into Synapse Analytics, and now from there I can interact with the data and visualize and provide the response to my customer. So these change data captures, or CDCs, are a great way for me to integrate for an integration between your SAP resources and your Synapse Analytics, where I can begin to extract and optimize this data. And of course, Azure OpenAI integration is great because the cognitive services and of course the power of large language modules, I can allow for this conversation with my data. So based on this example in here, how about we take a look at a real case scenario, a demo, where we are having a conversation with your data. The value of having a conversation with our data is that we can be specific with our intentions. First, we are interested in the trend of our monthly sales. Once we have the results provided by the bot of our monthly sales and insights of each of the months, we are interested in a more summarized approach, and we ask a summary of the sales performance. Once we have the summary, we want to be more specific about the month with the highest sales. And finally, how much we sold for the entire year. For this session, we are going to explore the AI integration. Now, for the AI integration, we are going to be talking about the intelligent data platforms. So when we look at the Synapse Analytics, for example, Synapse Analytics allows us to integrate various data sources, allows us to create a centralized repository where I may be able to talk to my own data. We can do this by leveraging the serverless SQL pool, where I can have a conversation with the data, create my specific tables, offline, online, and I can also create my data warehouse. With this integration with Synapse Analytics, I have Synapse links that allow me to talk to Cosmos DB or SQL database. But I can also have my data factory integration or my Synapse pipeline. And this Synapse pipeline allows me to bring data from various sources, such as, for example, SAP, or if I bring data from other data resources outside the Azure environment or from on-prem. With this data integration, I can also allow me to do, we call this governance of my data with Microsoft Purview. Microsoft Purview allows me to understand the data integration, all the metadata about my data. I don't need to bring in my tables, but at least I know where my tables exist, what kind of content are there. If I'm looking for customers, I'm looking for specific products, PII, I can now understand the landscape of my data and where it resides by having a tab on the pulse of this data using Purview. So this overall integration between Synapse Analytics, Purview, Data Factory, or the pipelines, and now the visualization with Power BI really allows me to integrate all of this data. So this is a collaboration of product integration for analytics in BI and governance. And this allows me to reach a much better cohesiveness of this intelligent platform as I begin to migrate my SAP workloads into Azure. Now, from a deployment perspective, when you look at building this analytical platform or analytical workspace, first we look at the SAP. SAP, I have my data. If I look from the left-hand side, I have my entire data in there. So I want to be able to look at this data. What do I want to bring it in from this existing environment? I can immediately see the benefits of this data availability. So I have my raw data from my line of businesses. Maybe I have my CRM, I have my graphs, I have my images, my social media, maybe even my IoT devices. All of this I can bring into a data warehouse. So the Azure Data Lake allows me to build this data store. I can put in all the content and I can begin to mine this content. I can put into my data lake and then into the data warehouse. Now I can look at real-time analytics, real-time data integration, leverage open standards, vendor-specific or vendor-agnostic configuration for mine. So I can use, for example, Databricks. I can use other reporting tools to be able to mine this tool. Primarily, I can also visit this data vividly in Power BI in my reports. So we can hear from customers like yourselves that we need to be able to combine these internal systems of records, be able to bring this real-time integration of the data and the feeds into an intelligent platform, be able to leverage algorithms that will be able to mine this data, do predictive maintenance, do predictive analysis, and also allows us to talk to this data. So with that, if I look at from a configuration perspective, number one approach, how do I handle my data? How do I connect to this data? Number two, what about the cost effectiveness of this data? Putting all into one location, centralized, I can look at my pipelines, be able to identify, build my ETL, my ELT pipelines, and automate this on a regular basis. Leverage the open standards for connectivity, and then I can be able to analyze and visualize and optimize this data. So with that, we look at this building out the capabilities, best experience possible for our customers from beginning to end of this entire pipeline. When we look at the data connectors, so I want to be able to bring my data from SAP, leveraging the Data Factory or the Synapse Analytics. These connectors are available for both the Azure Data Factory and Synapse Analytics pipelines and really provide the capability of out of the box to bring this data. So I can integrate the storage, the browser with these results of the data sets, and I can also leverage the serverless SQL pool in Synapse Analytics or the dedicated SQL pool in my data warehouse. And with this, I can have the data lake storing all this data for agility and consumption. For this session, our learning objective is to investigate Microsoft AI with SAP workloads. If I look at the Power Platform, we've been talking about the Power Apps and the Power Platform, but here we're looking at SAP with Power Apps and Azure OpenAI. This automation of the sales integration, email requests, allows us to really create specific user scenarios where your company can receive sales orders. I can look at the requirements from the customers. Maybe there's an email, there's an OpenAI language module that I can use. I can leverage the capability of using the contracts, understand the customer data, and talk to this data specifically. So I can use the Azure Logic Apps. This allows me to create specific workflows for my data. I can monitor these connectors directly data from SAP with low-code or no-code integration. From that, we can also use Azure Functions. This allows me to really create serverless type of functions that do specific things. Maybe I want to extract relevant content from this data that's incoming from the customer, maybe an email, maybe a support call. And from that, I can leverage ChatGPT, or in this case, OpenAI with GPT-4 large language modules to be able to provide analytical content. Based on this analysis, I can also leverage the data lake. I can put the results of this data into the data lake. These results can be in a JSON or CSV format. And from there, I can use SAP connectors, create sales orders in SAP S/4HANA. And of course, I can use Azure Logic Apps, now in this case, from a workflow perspective, to integrate with Microsoft Outlook and be able to close this cycle, send the note back to the customer with the specifics of the sales order. So you can see that I can get an email or get an entry point from the customer, be able to enrich that content through the pipeline, either using the Logic Apps or using AI. And then with these connectors, I'll be able to enrich the content and send the content back to the customer with the specific value they're looking for. Now, one of the features that we are going to see in terms of this enrichment of the AI is leveraging the AI SDK for SAP ABAP. So now, as you begin to program your business decision, you begin to use ABAP for your customer experience to be able to program your business development. I now can insert AI into it. So I can use Azure OpenAI to really provide the product recommendation based on the customer's experience, past purchases, while the customer service application could also use natural language to be able to process this understanding of the customer, the inquiries, and also provide automated responses. So all of this integration allows us to have at the programming layer. Now I have my model deployment, I have my ABAP ready data types. I can then allow me to get my support with my customers, and I can also gradually increase my adoption from that. I can create SDKs to be able to communicate with my data. I can create my operational models. I can also look at the SDKs for my usage control, implement specific policies for use of this within my organization. So for this deployment, leveraging the SDK in our ABAP, I have a very comprehensive video that I want to display. But before we do that, I also want to be able to discuss the documentation. So the SDK for ABAP, we have a very nice site where we have described, and all the documentation is available. So you're able to download, and this is a free deployment. The cost of this deployment will be basically leveraging the Azure OpenAI models. So you're going to use the SDK for ABAP. This is version number 1. It integrates with Azure OpenAI, your ABAP SAP business process. Your developers can then create and integrate this into your application. And for example, an e-commerce application you're developing right now with your customers, you can then look at the product recommendations, and of course, your customer service can also look at this from a deployment or a recommendation for your customers. So let's take a quick look at this website, and then I will provide you a quick video describing the ABAP integration. The AI SDK ABAP integration is available in Microsoft GitHub. This is where you'll find the documentation. When I click on the documentation, I'll be able to see my API documentation, also the resource setup, the step-by-step configuration. Now, we have a friend of ours, has created a nice, very nice video describing the implementation and going through step-by-step use of the API. So we have some answers of these questions like, what is the Microsoft SDK? Also, what is OpenAI? What are the use cases where you want to deploy, and examples of that use case? So I have my resource set up. I can do this with Azure OpenAI, my integration with the SDK, and we also have the working with the SDK. So this is specific, the models, the files that I can create, and the fine-tuning of the model. We also have the enterprise controls. This is where I can choose the specifics. I want to be able to use enterprise controls, create my profile, and of course, use my handlers. So all of this is available for your SDK. So now that we have seen the documentation, we know the SDK exists, and I can input this in my programming of ABAP. Let's take a quick video, a look at a quick video with the deployment in use of the SDK.
So I quickly want to talk about the Microsoft AI SDK for Azure. So it's an SDK that you can download here from GitHub. There's a lot of documentation in here, which really helps you to get started. So read through this, but actually what we want to do, we want to actually take a look at how this looks like, what you can do with this. So in ABAP Git on my SAP system, I've installed the ABAP SDK, which basically installs all the classes. An easy step to get started is actually to use this demo completion program. So I just need to enter my access information to the Azure OpenAI, and then I can play around directly from ABAP, from my SAP system with Azure OpenAI. So let's say I want to interact with some data. So what I could very easily now do here in this chat, I could say here, look, I'm making this invoice payment for invoices, blah, blah, blah. Extract the invoice numbers from above text and list them in one invoice in each line. So I can just click here on the button, and then the ABAP code is executed. It calls the Azure OpenAI service, and I get here this list extracted from this. Of course, I could do this with a regular expression or something like that. But here, OpenAI basically takes care of this. So obviously, the next thing that I could do is I could say, sort the invoice numbers in ascending order. And if I click on Ask AI again, then you can now see that we get the invoice numbers in a sorted order. So that's all quite simple, obviously, and you could use other mechanisms to do the development. But let's say you access your SAP system and you retrieve some information now on some shipping information. So you have correlation ID, sender information, you have versions, you have ship to parties, and so on. And now you want to dynamically extract some information. So, for example, you might want to extract here this shipping trailer ID. So, of course, I could just ask here, extract shipping trailer ID from the above text, and the number is extracted. Now, the really cool thing is that it doesn't have to be a shipping trailer ID. Let's say here this is just a shipping container ID or something like that. Something which would be much more complicated to get from via regular expression. Now I can actually still ask for shipping trailer ID, but the AI will see that this is most likely the best match and extract the information. And that's just one simple example how the integration of the OpenAI in the ABAP world could really help simplify extracting information and also in the development. The main idea of this demo here is really to just inspire. And I actually want to show you one other example that a colleague of ours developed based on the Azure OpenAI SDK. So let's say I want to create a new program. I have here already the header basically, and now let's say I just want to do a simple hello world program. So what I can do is I can say, write an ABAP program that asks the user for the first name and displays the name. So almost like a GitHub Copilot fashion, what I can now do is I can click here on pattern. We have a pattern defined called ZGTP. And if I execute this, then I get a lot of ABAP code, even some instructions of what I need to do. So let me clean this up a little. There are obviously a few things that we don't need in an ABAP program. Then let's try to activate it and give it a try. So you can see it asks me for a name, Holger. And if I execute the program now, it says, hello, Holger. So that's obviously a very, very easy scenario. So let's take it up a notch. Now let's ask the AI to actually create a program, but also take some information, take some sales orders informations. So write a simple hello world ABAP program. It should fetch the first 10 sales order entries and display the sales order numbers and prices. So keep in mind, we're not saying where this information is coming from. We're just saying what we want to do. We'll again trigger this pattern here. So let's see, let's clean up again some of the scenarios here. And down here, I guess we need to clean up, and that should be it. Let me activate it. Now it's activated. Let's just run it. Take this one. Here we go. We have some sales orders and we have the prices, and without me writing anything. So basically it knew the tables, it knew how to extract the information, it knew how to do the appropriate lookups, and then it wrote the results. So let's quickly look behind the scenes and actually how easy or relatively simple it was for the ABAP developer to create this extension. So with this, we'll take a look at the function module that has been implemented, this exit sublocal edit. And if we take a look here at the code and look at this include here, then you can see that we're looking here for this specific pattern, obviously. But the most important thing is, so if we want to do something, we'll call this execute chat completion. And in the chat completion, that's where the magic, the translations to Azure OpenAI happens, basically. So yes, we need to provide the connection details, like what is the Azure OpenAI key and stuff like that. But then for me, as the ABAP developer, the only thing that I need to do is I'll invoke here this chat completion. So there's the SDK instance, chat completion, create. I provide here the relevant prompts and informations, and then I get the results back from the Azure OpenAI service. So for me, I can really stay in my ABAP environment. I can stay in SE38 or in SE80 in this specific case, and still leverage and easily consume the services from Azure OpenAI.
And this concludes our session number 4. In this session, we were able to discuss the integration with the Power Platform, the benefits of this integration with low-code or no-code kind of integration automation. We also discussed the data integration with Synapse Pipeline and Data Factory. And finally, we talked about AI integration, in particularly with the AI SDK integration for your ABAP deployment. And this concludes our virtual training day. For this virtual training day, we discuss the benefits of your migration of SAP workloads to Azure. We talked about the long-standing relationship between Microsoft and SAP, the types of deployments that are supported, the agility, the cost savings, the security approach, and the various types of deployment that you can achieve. With that, we also reviewed in section number 2 the deployment styles. If I want to do an IS, I also want to do a PaaS or a SaaS type of deployment. And we reviewed the ACSS, which is Azure Center for SAP Solutions, that allows you to really expedite the delivery. Instead of a manual approach that could take hours or days, I now can leverage ACSS and accomplish this, depending on the type of my environment, in a matter of hours. In session 3, we discussed the security when we reviewed Microsoft Defender for Cloud, and we dove deep into Sentinel, our SIEM solution for event monitoring, threat monitoring. With that, we completed the session with section 4, again, talking about AI, data integration, and ABAP SDK. I hope you enjoyed this session and you are looking forward to your next training day.